On today's episode of Driven Too Far, The Truth About Trucking, we're going to talk about how ghosting your employer can come back to haunt you. Hello, I'm Andrew Winkler, and this is Driven Too Far, The Truth About Trucking, a podcast that helps over-the-road truck drivers balance career and family. Have you ever taken a long break from the road and you've spent some time at home and maybe something just isn't quite right at your current driving job, and you get emotionally tied up and you said, you know what, it just isn't worth it anymore. I'm not going back. The heck with it. These guys can just come get their truck. I'm done with them. Well, today we're going to find out what happens when you make those kind of decisions. What happens to your professional driving record behind the scenes? When a driver applies at a new company, a lot of things are happening in the background with the recruiter. And you know, if you filled out any kind of driver applications themselves, those things are long. They're several pages long. Driver has to include 10 years of work history, and that's a DOT requirement, by the way. And it's a lot. And if you've had a lot of jobs, then 10 years, that can really make the application process kind of exhausting. When the recruiter gets your application, and if you've passed their initial screening, they're probably going to push you a document asking for your signature, and it's permissions to run additional background checks to look into your history and your driving history in particular. It might include things like your MVR, your PSP report, criminal background sometimes, and probably a host of other things. And one of the things that recruiters typically run is called a DAC report, and that's DAC. There's several of them out there in the industry like that, but DAC's kind of the old standard, if you will. Most trucking companies still use the DAC report. DAC is a consumer report that truck lines use to record some of your driving history. What kind of employee were you? Did you have any accidents or incidents? How long were you employed by that truck line? And then when a recruiter decides to run your DAC report, they're pulling it because they want to see if your previous job history matches what you put on your new application. A couple of the other things that end up on your DAC, usually from your former employers, are the reason for your departure. Were you terminated, or was it a voluntary quit on your part, and what was the reasoning behind it? Are you eligible for rehire at all? And then there's also a section in there that's a little bit subjective, but it asks about your characteristics as an employee. How was your attitude, and some things like that. So a couple ways your previous actions can come back to haunt you when you're searching for a new job. Let's say the recruiter at the new company has pulled your DAC. One of the first things they're going to look for, again, is they're going to look at the dates you put on your previous employers, and they're going to go back to the DAC report and make sure those match. Now, if you're way off, or if you've purposely omitted some driving jobs, because you're trying to hide something, basically, that's grounds for that's falsification of your application, and it's just grounds for either immediate dismissal or that employer is just simply not going to consider your application for employment. Another thing that you typically get asked on a driver application is, have you had any recent tickets or accidents? And again, the new company's checking to make sure what you put on your application is similar to what is showing up on your DAC report. Now, it's not that unusual for a driver. If you're listing several years of jobs, once in a while you're off by a month or two on some dates. I know in our case, we typically give those drivers some grace. The recruiter will see that or notice that, and they'll just have a discussion with you and say, listen, I noticed these employment dates are off just a little bit here and there. Is it possible that you didn't quite hit the right month that you either started or left a job? And that certainly can happen. But we're really looking for patterns, if you will, in the application where people are trying to cover up. Maybe you've had 10 jobs in 10 years and you're trying to cover that up, or it only looks you had 7 jobs in 10 years or something like that. Maybe you started an orientation with a company, and within a week or so, you knew that this company wasn't the right one for you, and you skipped out and you started a different job. A lot of drivers, what they'll try to do is just cover up that fact that they took a week and started with that other company, and hoping that nobody notices that. But in the end, it usually gets caught in your DAC report because the company that you left is also supplying information to DAC on your work history. When I looked through driver applications, and I was in a position where I was giving final approval for an applicant after the recruiter had gone through the whole process, one of the things I distinctly look for would be patterns of behavior. And that may be on the application itself, or that may be off the DAC report. But one of the things I can remember seeing pretty frequently was on your application, there might be a section there that asks, why did you leave this employer? And what I would typically see was drivers saying it was a dispatch problem or a safety problem, or they screwed me over on this. You end up seeing a pattern emerge where, from my point of view, you simply have a driver that's not taking personal accountability for his actions, and he's projecting, he's blaming, and everything that's gone wrong is somebody else's fault, and he's not taking ownership of the issues. The second way that a DAC or your history can kind of come back to bite you is when I think about drivers that have committed to a new job, and I wish I was talking from a place where I didn't have experience like this, but the reality is some of this was recent with us, and it kind of spurred my idea for a podcast just to let drivers know what's really happening behind the scenes here. But we typically have a couple drivers a week scheduled for orientation. Our recruiter does a fantastic job of lining these people up. We send them offer letters, so everything's in writing. There should be no surprises at all. It's very detailed. And then we line up rental cars, we line up hotel rooms, food vouchers, everything that we need to take care of that driver. So usually the Friday before orientation starts, the recruiter will make one last call to the driver. Hey, just want to make sure you got all your information. You know when you're picking up your rental car. Here's your hotel reservation when you arrive to our town. And then the driver's, yep, got it all, looks great, no questions, great. We'll see you on Monday morning. Looking forward to meeting you in person. And here comes Monday morning. One driver shows up, and then we haven't heard anything from the second. So the first thing that happens is we pick up the phone and call the hotel and say, listen, did this person check in last night for their room? Nope, they didn't. Okay. The next call is to the rental car company and saying, did so-and-so pick up their rental car on Saturday? Nope, they didn't. Okay, so we know we got an issue, right? Something's happened, something's changed where they've decided not to come to orientation. Well, our first concern is for the driver themselves as a person. It's like, oh my gosh, did something happen? We should be concerned about. So we immediately try to call them. A lot of times you won't get an answer. You get a voicemail. We try to text. We won't get a response. And it's this act of people just ghosting you for no apparent reason. And they don't have the common courtesy to communicate back to the employer. And it's really unfortunate because you know what? We as an employer in good faith, we put a lot of money out there. We put a lot of time and effort into recruiting you and getting you set up and making all these arrangements for you to come join our team. Now, part of me is glad that if that's your character as a driver, I'm glad that it happened now and that you didn't show up and we didn't invest even more money in the orientation and the training processes and things like that, only to have it fail or go south. But what I don't understand is, with today's technology, everybody's got a cell phone in their hand all the time, that you couldn't send a simple text that says, hey, something's changed. I won't be in orientation on Monday. Sorry. That's all you have to say. So the idea that people simply ghost you and you can't find them, they won't communicate with you, it's extremely disappointing. When that happens, you go back to this DAC report we're talking about. Some of that information can go on the DAC report, meaning they were a no-call, no-show, and there's some things that you could put on their DAC report. Now, we don't always do that in every instance, and we really try to think those things through, because at the end of the day, we're not out to burn anybody. That's not our goal. But truck lines in general do, as a professional courtesy, share information about drivers, and this is a place that you could certainly do that. So maybe it was a one-off thing that you weren't able to make orientation and didn't communicate and stuff, and I hope that's the case. And whatever happened, I wish you well, and I hope you can get things back together and on track in your life. But again, we're looking for patterns. So if you're a driver that has done this more than once, those things are going to start to show up on your DAC and your history reports. And eventually, you're going to find it more and more difficult to get a job or get a job offer, because once the recruiters and the management and the safety people start to go through those background checks and some of that information, they'll say, hey, there's a pattern with this person, and I'm not sure they're worth the risk for us. Back to my opening statement when I said, maybe you had an off day, something's changed, and you've been at home for a while and you decided, I can't go back. I need a change or something. So thinking about your current company, this is something that unfortunately we've seen over the years too, where something's changed with the driver and they've just decided, no, I'm not going back. And they don't have the courtesy to bring the truck back and do all the things they should be doing to exit the job properly. They go silent. We don't hear from them. We've got to go recover a truck. That usually costs thousands of dollars to do that. By the time you take multiple drivers, go get it, bring it back to a terminal, recondition it, and do all those things. One of the questions is, did you quit under dispatch? So that's a whole nother level there, where maybe you were home for the weekend or through the holidays here recently, and you were under a load. Dispatch had you all set up to deliver a load the next week. And then here we come in Monday morning and we find out the truck hasn't moved. We can't get a hold of the driver. There's a load sitting on the truck. Now what do we do? So we've got a driver that's not only ghosted us, they've done it under dispatch too. You can bet that after we recover the equipment and handle the load and do all the things we need to do, that there's going to be some reports back on your DAC or your background history report there that reflects your decisions. If a driver would call, if a driver would text and just say, something's changed, I know I have the truck and the trailer at home and I've got a load under it, but I can't go, there's something going on with them. Maybe it's a family issue, and that certainly happens. I think the truck lines are probably going to give you a lot more grace if you would just communicate your issues. We understand that. We've all been doing this job for a long time, and we know those things can happen. So it's super frustrating from an employer's perspective when we try to do everything on our end to communicate and over-communicate when we can, but when we don't get the same courtesy back for drivers, that information is inevitably going to land on your DAC report at some point. So where does that leave you? Again, it's applying for new jobs, maybe future employers of yours starting to see some patterns emerge from the information that other truck lines have shared about your behaviors. The other thing you need to think about, when we go back to, we were talking about the application process, and a driver has to put on their 10 years of work history. Now, the recruiter of the new company you're applying to has to go back and verify 3 of the 10, so the last 3 years, and the driver has to list the full 10. The interesting thing about those DAC reports is they don't necessarily have, they're not limited by date or time. In other words, if you've been driving a long time, then the information in the DAC system, there's a lot of it on you, and it's probably as long as you've been driving. So if you're a veteran in the industry, we could run your reports today, and it might have 20 years of details of the employers you've worked for in the past. And again, it just gives us more information to see what kind of character you are. Now, hopefully, We can see where other companies have reported on you that you worked from this date to this date, and were you eligible for rehire? That's always a really good indicator if you're somebody that we want to pursue, because if other truck line says, you know what, he did work here, she did work here from these dates, they did a good job, they didn't have any safety incidents, and we would absolutely welcome them back. That says a lot about you. But there's also a box right next to it that says not eligible for rehire. So again, that's the red flags that we're kind of looking for in the character of the drivers that are applying. So if you are ever tempted, or you feel like you're in that position where you can't go back, or you want to leave your current company, just think about what that one moment of emotion that you're having could do to you for the rest of your driving career. And it certainly could leave some black marks on your record, and you don't want that. So take a moment, communicate with your carrier and just somebody you trust there, and just tell them, say, listen, I'm just struggling here and I need a break. I'm struggling here and I think I need to leave your employment, but I want to do it the right way, or at least I want to leave on good terms. So maybe down the road, when I get things straightened out, or when my situation changes, you would consider having me back. I think just about every truck line out there would absolutely do that, and we would do whatever it took to help you through that process, even if that means, we know you're quitting us, even if it means having to figure out how to recover a truck. It's the idea that you communicated with us and told us you were having issues. The drivers that don't communicate, where they just ghost you and you never hear from them again, those are the ones that end up with the black marks on their record. And at least in our case, when we're filling out those forms on deck about your employment and what kind of employee you were, we stick to the facts. In other words, we don't put any subjective remarks in there about how I personally felt about you as an employee or a person. So we don't do that. I think that's a little dangerous. But we do absolutely will check off things like the employment dates you had. Did you return the truck to where you were supposed to? Did you abandon the truck? Did you have any accidents or incidents, drug or alcohol issues, anything like that? So it's always factual based what we report. Well, by now I hope you're kind of curious about your DAC report, and maybe you're wondering what is on my DAC report, and you should be. You should know, and it's a consumer report. So if you would query or Google HireRight is the name of the company that has the DAC report. If you just Google HireRight, and in their frequently asked questions section, it will tell you how you can get a free copy of your DAC report once a year. So I think that time and energy would be well worth your efforts. You should, just like a credit report or anything, you should really know what's on your driving record and your employment record. There's a chance that something on there's not right, and maybe it's preventing you from getting a new job or the good job you've been looking for. I've also seen things in the past where when you left a carrier, maybe they were emotionally charged and they tended to put down some things on a driver's DAC report they shouldn't have, or were exaggerated. But that would be a great way for you to learn exactly what's on there, and then you could go back to that carrier if there was some things on there that simply weren't true, and ask for them to be removed and updated. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Driven Too Far. If you've enjoyed our podcast so far, why don't you give us a 5-star review, and we'll catch you on the next episode.